Welcome back to another Catholic Family News special report. I'm Brian McCall, the editor and chief of Catholic Family News, and we have a really, I think, great show tonight. I'm joined by two guests. First, Stephen Kokx, who should be familiar to many of our viewers. We've had a couple of conversations before. He's written a few things in the paper. He was responsible for our first big piece from Archbishop Vigano. He wrote a letter to Archbishop Vigano to which His Grace responded. He's also writes for LifeSiteNews as well. And then we're also joined for the first time to Catholic Family News by Daniel Vasko, who is a independent business owner and independent scholar as well. And welcome to the program, both of you. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
And so our topic for this special report is Catholic race theory. Yes, I said that correctly. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. Not critical race theory, but Catholic race theory. And both of the gentlemen that are joining me tonight have just completed a 5-part series in Catholic Family News, the newspaper, which we've been unveiling over the past 6 months or so to develop this topic. As I many times say, in the paper, we're able to take a lot of time and really thoroughly go through issues. I don't think we've, as far as I can remember, haven't had a 5-part series before. I think that is going to get the prize for the most in depth. But it was really an excellent series that looked at some really, really important issues. And we wanted to bring the topic to our video viewers for you to learn about what they've been doing. So, Stephen, if we can maybe start with you, could you maybe set the scene by explaining for us why you set out to write this series of articles to address this topic right at this time in history?
Yeah, well, Daniel and I are, first of all, thankful to you for having us have the opportunity to write. I think it was a total of 10,000 words in total, a 5-part series that we published in the paper from September of 21 through February of 22. And, this topic really came about last summer when we had all these debates about critical race theory. We had various situations in the political arena involving different people, and it was on the tongue of everybody in politics. And we started just, myself and Daniel, talking about what is really going on here. What is the issue? What does the church teach about race, about conflict, about the different peoples of the world? And, we are looking into the various statements that were being put out by various clergy last summer. And really all it would talk about is, many of the statements would talk about the need to treat each other with dignity, that racism is a sin, and a lot of boilerplate talking points about just human respect. Okay. Now, on a certain level, obviously, we need to do those sorts of things, but that's a very superficial understanding, we thought, of the peoples of the world. Daniel actually lived in Italy for quite some time. He's more of the biblical scholar of the two of us. And we started just kicking some ideas around and said, where can we find the resources to really present a robust and important and valuable and accurate Catholic teaching on what is really afflicting our society today when it comes to peoples of different ethnicities, of different nationalities, and really we did a deep dive into various subjects, as we'll talk about tonight. There's only actually been quite a small few number of scholars in the church's history who've really touched on what we think is an accurate portrayal of what the church's teachings on race and of the origins of people are. So, and we kind of went through all that, unpackaged it, discussed it. I'm involved in politics and current events. Again, Daniel's more the academic and historian on these things. And so our partnership has really blossomed into what I think is a really comprehensive view of presenting what the Bible says about the peoples of the world, as well as a contemporary look at social and political issues. And we've tried to blend that together. And I think what we've done is present a really robust piece of work that really needs to be referenced and listened more by the church of today.
Well, quite an ambitious project. Daniel, do you have anything else to share on kind of this origin or how you went about the project?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good introduction by Stephen. We have to address this issue in a modern context, the issue of race. As Stephen said, it's pretty much all over the news. It's definitely directing a lot of public policy and whatnot. And the bottom line is that our whole modern perspective is geared towards the perspective of the evolutionist perspective, the false theory of evolution. And unless, race right now is basically competing, the peoples of the world are competing genuses in a taxonomic rank to these people. And of course, the, evolution and Marxism go pretty much hand in hand. So we have to come up with a way to kind of put the brakes on all this. And it to me, it's the only, and probably to you as well, and our viewers, the only way we can do that is from a Christian perspective. That's undeniable. You cannot deny that any longer. And the whole idea with our modern context of evolution, and I call it the false theory of evolution, the false religion of evolution, because if you look at how much evidence has been found for evolution, it's pretty much non-existent. I reference Dr. Kent Hovind. He's a great source on this. He has a whole conference on YouTube. Go check him out. Debunks evolution. Okay, so instead of looking at the races of the world as competing genuses, like I said, and survival of the fittest, we're looking at each other as brothers and as cousins from the same prophet. We're a direct bloodline from the same prophet. And evolutionists might say that as well. They might say, well, we come from a rock, so we share the same ancestor or whatever. We come from a whale or whatever. No, because that theory proposed is still a matter of survival of the fittest. According to them, we're at war. Of course, there's going to be racial strife in the world if we're at war. Okay, but the Christian perspective, that is Catholic race theory, promotes the truth that we are all created by God and we are descended from the same prophet, and we have complementary talents and tendencies, and that we must share, that we must learn from each other.
No, excellent introduction. And I think what you allude to is very true, that the theories of Darwinian evolution, and they're really debunked, as you said, theories, but the theories of Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, have a pretty dark history. If you look at history, they really went hand in hand with the race, the theories that of social organization, political power, that tried to use it as an excuse for fomenting racial hatred and animosity. And so I think you're right to hit that on the head. So if we start digging into the topic, I mean, those sort of insipid Vatican II, the dignity of the human person, that doesn't mean very much, it is attractive in a certain sense to people because there is a core truth there that they don't really move beyond, but that God created all the species. One species, the highest species of the material, the corporal universe, is man. Right? Man is is unique, made from one human being, and then his helpmate, who then propagate the earth. And so we all human beings, regardless of any of these other differences, have the unifying human nature. So everyone has the same human nature. We are all affected by the same original sin, and we all have the exact same path available, if we accept it, to salvation. So the church always emphasizes and explains what is universal among human beings. But as so much of what the church does, she then also looks and says, in addition to this universality, we recognize differences. So there's the humani generis, the human race, but then there are also the gens, the tribes, might be a better Latin translation, but these differences. And that's what we're going to turn to now. So I want to get that out, that when we're talking about the differences, that's always complementary to the same human nature and the same predicament that we all face as sons of Adam, having original sin. So let's turn to this. What does the Bible or Catholic teaching tell us about the origin of the different tribe or race, use that term, a group of people in the earth?
So I'll give a first intro, and then Daniel can expound on the different tribes. We have to, as Catholics, believe that Adam and Eve were the first human beings God created, man and woman, right? So we're differentiated by sex, male and female. We're also differentiated further later on at the Great Flood. Okay, God saved Noah and his 3 sons and their wives from destruction. Those are the 8 souls that God preserved from being washed out with the Great Flood as a result of man's sin. Once this happens, this great, very tragic event in regards to at least human history, you could say, the tribes of Noah, essentially Japheth is one son, Shem is another, and Ham is the third. We know in Genesis that after the flood, Noah got off the ark, had wine, and became inebriated to the point of passing out without any clothes on. And we read that Ham laughed at his father, whereas his other brothers covered him up. And we see from that various events that have transpired. After the flood, God enlarges the tribe of Japheth, and eventually chooses Shem and Ham for different destinies. And I think Daniel can talk to those different tribes and kind of what happened to them after the flood. But that's what the beginning part of Catholic race theory holds.
And you know, when talking about the flood, again, going back to my point real quick about just reinstituting Genesis as a believable historical context it's absolutely essential before we start about talking about this. But and briefly, I'll say that anybody who's interested can look up the archaeological research of Ron Wyatt. It is my opinion that he rediscovered the Ark of Noah. So, and a boatload, no pun intended, boatload of historical evidence was found in Turkey at this site. So much so that the Turkish government constructed a tourist center over there. And this goes to, Japheth. Maybe we'll get to this later, but the historical context is that once the ark settled in modern day Turkey, there were certain tribes. They call them the generations of Noah. That is the generation, the progeny of Japheth, son of Noah, of Shem, son of Noah, and Ham, son of Noah. They all founded primordial bloodlines that eventually saw their distant progeny, settle in different parts of the world. Back in ancient times, these differences would have been more pronounced than they are today. Nowadays, a large, if not most of the world, is a mix of this. So is this exact science? No, but it helps immensely to find out, where these tribes settled. And as you can see from the illustration there, Japheth is considered the father of the Europeans. Shem is considered the father of the Asiatics. So and then Ham is considered the father of the African people. Now, we know the term Semitic. Semitic is about the only term in reference to the tribes of Noah that we still use. In fact, some encyclopedias will even say that, if you look up the word Japheth or Japhethite, they'll say a now defunct term, because we only use it in the context of Semitic. But that's what it means. It means someone who is descendant from the line of Shem. So we use that in reference to modern day Jews. However, Semitic means Asian as much as it does Jewish. So a Japanese person, for example, can be said to be from the line of Shem. And so these people spread throughout all the world, relatively in their own areas, and they branched out from there. And there's been invasions and colonizations and things that have taken place that have mixed some, but to me, I feel like that in a Christian context is what a race would be in relation to people, because as far as skin color goes, is pretty much the only criteria that we use today, which is a shame, because it's a color. It's not something as deep as Noah's ancestors. But in this context, in the context of the Christian, the lines of Noah, generations of Noah, I should say, that doesn't really work, because as we show from our series, modern day, there's a heavy component of Hamitic. So Hamitic, like I said, they were the father of the African people. Well, especially in relation to sub-Saharan African people, black people, are considered Hamites. But at the same time, a modern day Irish person, or even a Western Spanish person, as we show from our articles, could be considered Hamitic as well. So it really doesn't really have anything to do with skin color.
That's a really interesting point. Right, that's about thing that people, well, what race or race? Well, skin color. Well, but that's really a pretty exterior, superficial, in a certain sense, quality to find a distinction, where you're finding a real distinction in genealogy, all going back to this second repopulation of the earth after the flood. So we have these three generations of Noah that we're talking about, major groupings that initially are in these three parts of the earth, but as you say, then begin to move and intermix. What then do we learn from the Bible or Catholic history about these races? I mean, about the generations that come from each of these sons of Noah. What characteristics do they exhibit that, more importantly than a pigment of skin color, tell us something about a generalization about them?
Yeah. Each generation of Noah has a particular, have their own particular talents and tendencies and gifts even. And in order to have a good relations between the races, you have to understand the races. And to give you some example, a Japhethite, a European Japhethite, is said, and I'm quoting from, not quoting, but I'm referencing from How Christ Said the First Mass. Father James Meager talked about this, but Japheth has a expansive, let's say, industriousness and order. That is the Japhethite tendencies or talents, you could say. And it's, look at, how much Japhethite here in the United States, works. We work all the time. We never stop working. Whereas a Semite is known for their propensity for spirituality and intelligence. I mean, without you could say, the Jews have a higher IQ in relation to their Japhethite cousins. A Chinese person, they're more intelligent. Meanwhile, it's said that the sub-Saharan or the South American people are predominantly of Semite descent, but they seem to exhibit the more spirituality. An Arab is a spiritual person. They're a Semite, technically, a predominantly Semite people, it's said. The Hamitic people are the only ones that seem to know about community anymore these days, because they're communal. So they have a communal tendency and very artistic. They have artistic tendencies. They're the only ones that understand art and community. Okay, but in our modern world, each tribe has seemed to, without the faith and without a clear understanding of natural law, each tribe has seemed to devolve into their excesses. Like, for example,
That's a good point before we get into it, to make sure people are with us. And if you have a family, right, you may have seen this, right? You have children. Each child exhibits a different strength, a different tendency, which if they are properly formed in the faith and use it well, you'll see how that will be the path for them to save their soul, right? One might be more industrious, or one more, academic. But the danger you see as a parent, at least I've seen, is that good thing, that good trait or gift they have, can also become their downfall, right? They become too unbalanced towards it. They're just academic, they just read, and then they lose charity.
It becomes
exactly
pathological.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's good. You've brought us through the gifts or the traits that, again, in general, whenever we speak about these things, it's like a family, right? Oh, that family, down the street, they're known for such and such. They're really good, woodworkers, or that. And now, you may have one son doesn't have the family trait, right? So we're talking in general, just what different historians and people have observed about these tribes. So now talk us a little bit how the different positive tendencies or gifts, when misused and when not formed by the faith, how they can degenerate and become a problem.
Well, yeah, I would say look at a Japhethite. We work constantly. We never stop working. If you go to a party here in West Michigan, no one is listening to music. Everyone's playing the board games, and there's nobody's drinking wine. Maybe that's just West Michigan. I don't know. But does that sum it up for you? I mean, and then we put our relatives, I mean, I'm not judging anybody here about this, but we tend to put more people in nursing homes because we don't have the communal aspect. Our religion is, and I love to be self-critical about this because I guess I'm predominantly Japhethite. I might have other things in me. I don't know. It's not exact science, but our spirituality, our religion is Protestantism. Okay, that's a Northern European Japhethite, pure Japhethite religion. It's not a religion. Semites know about religion. The church, the mass was formed, which we can talk about a little later. It's actually a combination of the propensities of all three generations, which makes it the real race relation right there. But we need to, a shake of a hand, Mormonism or, Scientology, that's a Japhethite religion. It's not really a religion. So we need to learn from, like, let's say Shem on this, which we learn from Shem, not necessarily by adopting Middle Eastern practices. We learn from Shem by coming to the true faith, which they already figured this out. The church figured this out centuries ago. They codified the mass with the idea that there's three different propensities, three different generations with different talents. Okay, so yeah, we learned about community from Ham. We learned about artistry from Ham. I mean, look at how a Japhethite dresses, and I don't mean to be disparaging the Japhethites here. I'm having a little fun with this. Okay, I mean, we don't necessarily, like a skyscraper, I feel like is something that a Japhethite would come up. It's like an all glass building like that. So you're basically you're learning. Meanwhile, they other generations can learn from our industriousness. It's that sort of thing. But again, I want to remind everybody, like, without the faith, it's just excess. You have to be more balanced out. It's like a temperament that you want to be all the temperance. You have your predominant, but you want it to be close to where you're evened out. So we can learn from.
That's a great point, because again, if anyone's read about the four temperaments, the best thinking about our Lord from biblical scholars, he was the perfect balance of all four temperaments, right? That he exhibited the best of all of them as our model in human nature. And so again, I was thinking the same thing as you were talking, the parallels to the temperaments, right? That our temperaments are what they are. To probably the rest of my family's a disappointment, I'm very choleric, and that brings some strengths to the family. But it also has a danger, and if not balanced with the others. And so again, I think this is a similar concept. Rather than a temperament, you have on a not an individual level, but a larger group level, similar kinds of things.
And I would say that faith is that meeting point.
Yes. No, excellent. Yes.
You said something I couldn't quote you, but earlier on, that it's universality. So the idea of race relations can be solved only on a universal moral level.
Mm-hmm.
So the church did that for so many years. They said humans had a soul. They understood their different propensities and things like the mass, or each contributed to that. But I mean, in a secular state like the United States of America can do its part to heal race relations, but it's kind of hard because it's like the New York syndrome. It's kind of like, you can't force people to be nice, except on a universal moral level. And so that's what I'm proposing here. That's what we're proposing here, me and Stephen, is that the Christianity has to have a solution to race relations. That's why we got to be promoting this. It's not enough to just simply criticize critical race theory, but you have to have another idea to replace it.
Yeah, and I would want to jump in too, Brian. You asked about the excesses or the going too far into your given gifts.
Yes.
We know God chose the Semitic people to be his chosen people. This is the house of the generations of Noah that Christ himself belongs to. Christ was a Jew. He also chose after the flood to enlarge Japheth. Now, what does that mean? What it means, at least looking back historically, this is what the Middle Ages had accomplished, because the Japhethites, as Daniel mentions multiple times in our articles, as well as here tonight, their propensity is to take and go forth and to bring forth. We're natural evangelists, so to speak, and to go forward and to bring the gospel forward. And that was what the great Middle Ages had accomplished. And we speak about today and tonight the different peoples of the world and how the faith enriches all of us. I want to read a quote from Pope Pius XII. This is from a 1939 encyclical that he wrote. And he says, the nations of the world, despite their differences of development due to the diverse conditions of life and of culture, are not destined to break the unity of the human race, but rather to enrich and embellish the human race by sharing in their own peculiar gifts. And he goes on to say, the Church of Christ cannot and does not think of deprecating or disdaining the particular characteristics which each people possess. And so there's a tacit acknowledgement, I think, in that encyclical in 1939 by Pius XII that, yes, the peoples of the world have these different tendencies, these talents, these unique gifts. And we know that's the case because God is best shown forth in variety. His splendor is most beautiful when allocated differently, okay? And the peoples of the world are different. We're men and women. We belong to the Hamitic tribe, the Japhethitic tribe, or the Shemitic tribe. Or now today, because as Daniel's mentioned, the world is far beyond the flood, we're a mix of those. We also belong to a particular nation, America, Japan, Russia, France. And then we also have one of the four temperaments in us. So if you look at those characteristics or those sort of different areas, are we men or female, men or women? Which tribe do we belong to? Which nation do we belong to? What temperament are we as individuals? Those all are unique to us. But as we've been mentioning here tonight, there are some common tendencies. And to kind of bookend this comment here, the quintessential Japhethitic country really is ancient Rome and the Middle Ages, where we have the great going forth, the building of order and industriousness, and the Catholic religion going forward and showing the greatness of it. And perhaps now that we're in this era where we're beyond Christendom, we're beyond the post-liberal order, some say, we're definitely beyond the post-Christian order. We have these Western nations no longer clinging to the gifts that God gave them to go forth and preach the gospel. What we have is an Americanism, a Westernism, and this desire really to fight these crusades for capitalism, this George Bush mentality for globalism. And really what we're doing is just going at the behest of major corporations. And so it seems that instead of going forward historically, that what Westerners and Japhethites were best at, going forward and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, we're now going forward really and unfortunately spreading the gospel of free market capitalism in a sense.
That's a really great point, because I think it illustrates it, right? Industriousness, being organized, going out and getting things done is a good thing if the thing you're doing is good, right? So if it's obviously spreading the faith, then that's a good use of that quality. But if you remove that end, and then you're just building castles in the air. You're building, not really building something true. So I think that's a good example. Maybe could either of you help us with another example? The Mass, obviously something we talk about a lot, the practice of religion at Catholic Family News. So maybe just give us an example of something that one of the tribes has contributed to. As we said, I think one of you said the practice of the Catholic religion is a fusion of really what's good from all three of these. Maybe give us an example of that, but then also how, if that gets overemphasized in the practice of religion to the exclusion of that balance, it can distort religion or the Mass or the practice of religion. So I'll throw it at whichever of you wants to take that.
Yeah, I can have a go at it. So, I mean, with regards to the Mass, the ornamentation of the Mass is set. Well, first of all, Christ himself was a contribution of the Semitic tribe. So that's the God-man himself was a contribution. The spirituality involved with Semitic, based on my research, tends to be a more austere religion or a practice of spirituality, like going off into a desert type of thing. Like that's spirituality, on a primordial level for Semite usually. The ornamentation and the decor and the grandeur owed to God in the liturgy is a Hamitic contribution, according to a large part according to Father James Meagher, who says that things like the chasuble and the royal sandal and these other things came from influences of Babylon and Egypt when they were in captivity, and then when they were in Egypt prior to the Exodus. So the ornamentation, that's not a small thing. That's a great thing. Japhethites have completely lost it. Now, I mean, Protestantism is a perfect example of a Japhethite religion. They don't understand ornamentation. The order of, let's say, the ecclesiology is certainly a contribution of the Japhethite cultures, because we see in the so-called Orthodox, the Palamite Eastern faiths that are now schismatic, they don't understand. I would venture to say that they don't understand the order of the West, which is, I think, a large part of what the schism was about. I mean, the whole Hesychast, controversy and whatnot. Eastern spiritualities that were just kind of more random, seeped into the practice of the church. But and also, as Stephen said, the Japhethites are the ones historically to spread the faith. Like you said, it's scriptural that Japheth would enlarge. And the Crusades. The Crusades could only have been done by a Japhethitic people, in my opinion. I mean, it's a mass, concentrated, armed pilgrimage to save the Holy Land, which that's what it was against the Seljuk Turks. They were going to actually save the Holy Land from invasion. That's everything they contributed.
So to follow up on what you started with, so in one of the crises in the church, obviously, is the new Mass. And as we've talked about at Catholic Family News, there's lots of influences and tendencies that corrupted the Mass and the new Mass, the drive for ecumenism, etc. But then it sounds like maybe one of the things you're saying is a movement away from the Hamitic influence. So either whether it's for the Japhite, to make it very ordered and structured and just get to the essential what you need to do, or that more Semitic stress of having it just a bare altar or nothing. So, I mean, would you say, either of you say that maybe a fair observation that the church, in creating that banal on-the-spot product of the new Mass, to quote Cardinal Ratzinger, really lost sight of, among other things, maybe the Hamitic influence on religion?
I'd like to jump in there. I think really what you see with the Novus Ordo Mass is a sort of ethno-nationalism, to be honest. I mean, what that Mass does is that it allows for so many different prayers, local customs and cultures to be built into it with all the different options that it provides. It's very un-Catholic. It's very un-Catholic in that sense, in that it does diminish the universality of it. Okay, and what we see this happening with the Amazonian rite that Francis recently established. Okay, and what we're seeing is a lapping off of a true synthesis of the different gifts of the different tribes into which were present in the Latin Mass. Now, I wouldn't so much say that the Novus Ordo necessarily gets rid of the Hamitic influence. I mean, you still see very ornamental celebrations in various Novus Ordo liturgies, but what the Novus Ordo sort of allows for, or at least has devolved into, is a much more expressive and a much more focus on communal activities in the Mass. I mean, that's literally what the Novus Ordo definition of the Mass is. It's a communal celebration of the presider and the laity being there. And I think this sort of explains one of the reasons why you actually see in Africa why the faith there, or at least the conciliar religion and the Novus Ordo liturgy, is thriving, because those people are much more expressive and better at community than those in the West. And that's why you see historically, as a last quick point here, people, young men and women in the West, in the United States, will take historically John Lennon, for example, and the Beatles. They were raised in Japhethic Great Britain. And as they got older, they turned to the spiritual practices of Buddhism and the East. See? So a lot of what is taken out of the Western culture is that spirituality, is that transcendent order that the Latin Mass really brought. And that's why the West is drying out. And the global sort of South, where there's more Semitic people who like that sort of liturgy with their priest, that's really flourishing. And that's why you have in so many Latin American countries, Brazil, Colombia, etc., Pentecostalism, charismatic communities are popping up all over, because that matches the sort of natural tendencies. And that's, I think, a really unfortunate thing. And when I see the Latin Mass as being abolished by Francis and Archbishop Roche in Rome, they're committing religious suicide. They're cutting off half the world's, 2/3 of the world's arguably population, and saying, no, we're only going to have these local liturgies expressed locally, and no one wants to do that in the West, because Japhethites aren't technically overly spiritual and communal. Right. So it's a strange way to promote their religion.
Yeah, you raised really an interesting point. And I noticed this, I think it was on social media or the internet, back particularly when Traditionis Custodes came out, people saying that, ironically, their traditional Latin Mass communities, places that have gone to Latin Mass communities, are the most racially, ethnically integrated, because, this is where I go in Florida. There's all different. There's people Chinese. There's people from all different Latin American countries, from Spain. There's Italians. There's, and all going to the same Mass. Whereas a typical Novus Ordo parish, you get segregation, right? You get the Latin American Mass, and they just go and do it their way, as you said, and then you get the children's Mass and the whatever different segregation point you want. So ironically, if something synthesizes all of these elements, it's going to be acceptable and appeal to different aspects of it. Will appeal to everyone, regardless of what tribal tendencies they may share. I don't know. Is that do you think that's an accurate observation?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's happening. Yes. It's happening in my own diocese here in Grand Rapids. We have various Spanish Masses that are only for Spanish speakers. Again, the church is universal, and we see that that's not. I mean, we're not the Eastern Rite communities. We're not the Orthodox whose overemphasis is on their culture and on their localities and on their country's historical heritage. But again, the Catholic faith overcomes those differences without diminishing them inappropriately, but by saying we're going to exalt this. And that's, I think, as Daniel probably will talk about, that's a major error of the Orthodox communities that say and focus so much on their cultural heritage to the detriment of thinking that our faith goes beyond our borders, anything like that.
No, that reminds me of a funny film, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you ever seen it, it's kind of fun, poking fun at kind of that Greek culture. But one scene that brings to mind is there's the fiance that wants to marry into the Greek family. He's Jephite. He's just clearly, WASP. And so he goes and he gets baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church. And then the Greek father says, okay, good. Now you're Greek. So not now you're a Christian, but like that, there was really no distinction. That just made you ethnically Greek by being baptized.
Yeah. Right. Semitic peoples, their strength also is tradition. Traditions are important to them, and to the point where, the Hindu religion still worships gods that have not been around. I mean, the Roman Empire gave up their strange gods a long time ago. Modern Hindu religion is like you have elephant-headed gods and everything. So it's just tradition, and just like with the Far East with China and Japan, so they're predominantly non-Catholic cultures, they still have that tendency towards tradition. And so they carry that tradition. I think they would be so powerful to promote the true Catholic faith. Once they get a hold of it, it will never leave them.
Well, no, a very good point. Well, before we go, I do want to ask you a hard question. So if I'm going to play the sort of antagonist here, objection to what your project, how would you respond to it? So some will say, look, this theory or this explanation that Father Meagher mentions in his book, that others talk about, well, that's been used as a justification, particularly in the 19th century, to oppress certain peoples. So this idea that there are different people from Noah has been used by people to say, oh, well, and particularly Hamites. Oh, well, this whole theory shows that Hamites deserve to be subservient and are sort of a lower, this is going to get back a little bit to that Darwinian, but, that there's a hierarchy among the tribes, therefore that allows oppression of one or the other. How would you respond to that accusation that you shouldn't be talking about this because it could lead or has led in certain historical periods to that result?
Well, I would say that our theory completely debunks any idea in the slightest that any one generation is cursed or even blessed over the other one. It totally debunks that. We addressed that head on because we did expect kickback from that. I mean, I suspect that's why a lot of the Christians are really hush about this, is because they haven't done the research, or maybe it just we haven't got it out there yet to say that. So yeah, a lot of people say that there's, specifically for the sub-Saharan African Cushitic people, descended from the son of Ham, Cush. They say that somehow, I'd say around the time of the Civil War, there were some Protestants that were saying that they were necessarily like cursed and that they were deserved to be in perpetual servitude. I think that was just a misreading of it was a misreading of the Bible, predicated on the idea that, well, a Japhethite without the true faith, is so industrious and works all the time that, what they value, what a non-Catholic Japhethite values is material gain at all cost. Okay, that's where we are now. And of course, we judge everyone, we look down on everyone throughout the whole world that doesn't value material goods above spirituality, community. That's what we do. And we have this evolutionist perspective, like we're going to colonize the moon because we're just better than everyone else. And that's what the seedlings were that around the time of the Civil War. But that's totally debunked. You don't tell your kids, and I'll get to scripture verses here in a sec, but you don't tell your kids when you put them to bed at night that you want to be materialist. You want to be materially successful above all costs, don't you? No, you put your kids to bed at night. And you say you want to love your community, your family, and you want to put God above everybody else. Well, that's Hamitic Semitic. So anyway, that's where that started, I believe. With the Mormon Church not allowing Cushite people to become pastors there. But there was so in Genesis 9, Noah, as Stephen said, becomes intoxicated, and his brothers Japheth and Shem cover his nakedness. Ham, his son, mocked him and derided him. When Noah came to and sobered up, he cursed not Ham, but Canaan. Canaan was Ham's son, who settled modern-day Palestine, not sub-Saharan Africa. Cush is not cursed. Other Hamites are not cursed. In fact, Cush is, they've settled one of the most fertile areas in the whole world. They even had a pharaonic dynasty after them, the 25th dynasty. So Canaan was cursed, and by the way, that curse is revoked with Christ. All curses, even death, is revoked with the credo of Christ. Okay, and another thing they'll say is another thing that they'll say is that the curse of Cain, going way back to the beginning, the son from the son of Adam and Eve, they say that they say his curse was that he was turned. Some say, non-Catholic scholars say that he was turned black. He got black skin because of what because of his sin for murdering his brother Abel. We debunk that because we show that, and this is scriptural, that Cain's curse was not the so-called mark of Cain, which would have been the changing of the skin into blackness or whiteness. It could be whiteness too. I mean, skin color being the mark of Cain is highly debatable, and there's no evidence for that. But what the curse of Cain was that he would wander the earth as a fugitive. Some Catholic scholars that say, moaning and trembling was the mark. But so his curse was that when he learned of the curse, Cain came to God and spoke to God and said, having killed my brother, there will be people that will find me and kill me if they find me for what I did. Well, God said specifically, I will place a mark on you for your protection. So it's not a curse at all. In fact, it's almost like divine favor. So, and it doesn't stop there. He received that mark for divine protection. And the line of Cain in the Old Testament is the only one that is the line that invented metallurgy. It's the line that was the first to pasteurize or pasture animals, not pasteurize. It's pasture.
That's Louis Pasteur, right? No,
yeah,
just put in pasture.
They came up with that centuries, but maybe they pasteurized something too. I don't know. But pasture animals, they invented musical instruments. I mean, does that sound like curse to you? I mean, so whether that was whiteness or blackness, the mark of Cain, it says nothing about that. It's pure speculation.
And I would even add real quick to Brian that the curse of Ham, the idea that dark-skinned African Hamites are more less developed historically, that was used to justify many things, the slave trade among them. While we cannot understate the evils of doing that, all the different tribes at different times have enslaved members of their own tribe, as well as other tribes historically. So we look at the Germanics and how they sacked Rome. Okay, we look at different tribes of the Far East, Genghis Khan and others who wreaked terror on their own peoples. And we look at all different instances throughout history that are not just necessarily because someone might have been believed to be inferior. This is a tendency of almost all mankind towards their brothers in Christ when they lose the faith, to take advantage of their brothers in Noah and to do evil things to them. Unfortunately, it is a result of original sin, as well as a rejection of the Catholic faith. And my last point on this would be, we look at the Great Flood. The Great Flood was a result of man's sin. The three tribes, the three sons of Noah, Noah and all their wives, were the only ones to survive. And so what we see is, after the flood, the disbursement of these three tribes away from one another. Brothers are supposed to live in community with one another. We're supposed to be in the same household for our youth and upbringing and have close relations. These three went to entirely different continents as a result of sin, of the flood. Now, if we look at Christ's birth, as Daniel alluded to, we see the three wise men, the three kings, return to their rightful brotherhood. We believe that Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar are representatives of the three tribes. So Gaspar was a Japhethite, Melchior a Semite, and Balthazar a Hamite. And we see that when they come to the crib, although they're belonging to different tribes, they're all co-equal. None is so accursed before Christ where he says, "No, I don't want your gift," or "No, I don't want you here." We see them present. And besides all that, I mean, we look at the church fathers in history. I mean, St. Augustine was a North African Hamitic person. And we see in the different doctors of the church, they're all distinguished in different areas. And so we cannot say necessarily that any of the three tribes are greater than or less than, but really in a sense, you could say mirrors the Holy Trinity, in a sense that we're co-equal before God.
Wow, that's really a beautiful image, I think, that you bring us to there, of how the Magi really represent everything you're talking about, right? Because if your interpretation, your research is correct, they each represent one of the tribes, one of the generations of Noah, and they each bring a gift with them. This idea that each has their own gifts, but rather than being separated, what unites them, what brings them together, is this common journey towards Christ, to worship him. So that's really, I think, a beautiful image for what Catholic race theory can bring to the world. Rather than to separate and have them fight each other, they come together in the church, and literally in the church, the tabernacle, because it's the house that is where Christ is dwelling, the home where they come and kneel down and worship him. That's beautiful. So what can we do? And again, I think also your good point. Most of these distorted theories have come from Protestants, right? So they come from people who misread and misunderstand the Bible because they don't have traditions like this to guide them, and what led to those erroneous justifications for their own, lustful, sinful behavior. But maybe before we go, I do want to point out, because you've mentioned it a few times, this book, How Christ Said the First Mass, which I have to say is one of the first books when I first found the traditional Mass. And I'm not even sure who told. I think it was a priest, if I remember right, told me about it. And it really is a wonderful book. And it was the first time that I met these kind of points that you're talking about, because when I first got the first draft of your article, it reminded me of the book. But it also, particularly if you're new to the Mass, is really a beautiful explanation of how the Mass and the Last Supper are united. And a lot of times we, post-60s world, we tend to think of the Last Supper as like a hippie, like everybody's in hippie clothes, lying around having just a party. But it really was a very ritualized event. And Father Meagher really shows how so many ceremonies, particularly of a solemn Mass, have direct origin in that first Mass. So really a great book. I will put a word of warning, which I always tell everybody about the book. I say that it's a great book, but Father Meagher needed an editor. It's a little unwieldy. Now, some of that is the time he wrote. Turn of the 20th century was a little more flowery writing, but still it has lots of tangents, one of which are this all about Ham and Shem, which are fascinating in and of themselves, but often sometimes it can be a little hard for modern readers because we were talking about the origin of the vestments and now we're talking about this. So it is a little tough book to read, but really a very, very rich book in terms of scholarship, which I assume you since you rely on it so much, you have also found it helpful.
It's almost like that portrays the generations, I mean, their contributions so well within the traditional Mass. So
yes, very true, very true. Well, really thank both of you. And as you've seen in the interview to our listeners, there's a lot we didn't get into, right? We've just talked about the three tribes, as you've alluded to when talking about one of the sons of Ham. There's going to be even more detail there in terms of the next generations after generation one, the sons of Noah, and some further developments and issues. So it is a 5-part series. You can get it only in Catholic Family News. If you subscribe to the newspaper today, you will not only get going forward, but you get electronic access to back issues of the newspaper, which would include all of these. So if you're really interested in this topic, if you've enjoyed listening to Daniel and Stephen tonight or today when you're listening, and you want to dig into this more, if you subscribe to Catholic Family News already, or if you sign up for a subscription, these are all in the electronic archive, and you'll be able to access those and read the whole series and get into, again, some of the issues we only touched on tonight. So before I guess we wrap it up, is there any sort of closing thoughts that either of you or both of you would like to give before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think the one thing that needs to happen is we need to re-understand that race is not a social construct. It's not just about skin color. It's much deeper than that. We're made in the image of God, and we have innate tendencies, talents, gifts that complement everyone else. We're made to live in community, in the church, in civil society, and the way back to order among the sons of Noah is one in the church to do exactly the opposite of what's going on in Rome, and that is to reestablish the traditional Latin Mass, the one thing that has synthesized these gifts from all the tribes historically most perfectly, and brings to any nation that it's introduced in the most peace and hope and the surest way towards bringing a country back on its feet. And so that's the first thing that the church needs to do. But on the second front, we need to get out there on the political level. The solution is not political. Don't get me wrong when I say this. We need to consecrate Russia. We need to have Rome get back on its head. But in the meantime, we need to make sure that things like critical race theory, things like banning the teaching of creation in schools and the Great Flood, that needs to get back to where it was decades ago. And we need to understand that these are not Christian in any way. These radical ideologies for the left and their attacks on religion and pushing secularism are really devastating our country. And as all of us are taught, patriotism is a virtue, and we should have a love for our country, and we should do those things to push back against these individuals.
Wow, beautifully said, Stephen. I think on that note, thank you, both of you, for writing this and for talking about it tonight. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe to our YouTube or Rumble channel, and please share it. We can reach even more people. If everyone watching this shares with 5 people, we'll get this message out to many more people. So please help us show your gratitude for this free program by sharing it with your friends and acquaintances. And as I already said, consider subscribing to the monthly newspaper where you can read more in-depth articles like this. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you in the next Catholic Family News special report. God bless you.